What's up, everybody? We're back again, back with another episode of Bryce and Bryce, the Fan and the Artist, episode 4. We do this in honor of the 50th year of hip hop, celebrating the culture and all of the beautiful things that it has given all of us. And so today is another special episode because we're back with a special guest, our friend, our family member, our brother, David Ashley.
Yes.
An actor, thespian, podcast host, a producer, an antagonist, the music, all good stuff, man. No, but we have a lot of great conversations amongst us, and so we felt it was only right to bring it back to the forefront like we always do. And this particular one today is centered around the violence in hip hop. Who caused the violence in hip hop? Who's to blame for the violence in hip hop that we hear today? A lot of people are going to jail. A lot of people are dying. And, you know, it's a thing that's been happening, I would say, since the beginning of time. But I don't know if it's happened at this magnitude that it's happening now. And so we wanted to have a conversation about that. So what you guys think? How you guys doing?
I'm good, man. Yeah. Dave, it's good. This guy right here, man, I mean, this is one of the guys that can just spout off lyrics off the top of his head. It must be that actor muscle. That's what I always admire. Like, we'll be having conversations, Bryce, Dave, we may be talking about Jay-Z, and then he'll just interject the whole Jay-Z lyric quote. Right. So he's definitely always been tuned into the culture. Yeah. His podcast, if you haven't checked it out, what's your favorite song? Yeah, one of the best questions out there, like, what is your favorite song? So I know Dave, and we've had these conversations off camera. Yeah. He really respects music, but he respects hip hop culture. He's a historian to it. So, you know, like Bryce said, like, what's your opinion on if there's somebody to blame? Who's to blame for violence in hip hop?
Or do you feel like it really is a thing? Like, is that a real thing that we should be talking about and discussing in today's society, in today's hip hop?
You know, it's weird. And we, you know, when Bryce hit me up about it, I told him, I said, Bryce set me up because we have this debate, you know, all the time about, you know, so my take on it is that, you know, obviously some of it comes from, you know, the lyrics, right? Or some of the influence of hip hop has influence.
Yes. Oh, my
right.
God.
You know, yeah. Kanye got the line. He was like, "Man, I went to Jacob an hour after I got my advance. I just wanted to shine." Right.
See what I mean? That's what I'm talking.
It's just the way I use reference, right? So so I'd be a fool to say that only stops at talk about money and ice, you know, and all this other kind of stuff. The need to, you know, never underestimate the need for somebody to feel relevant, to feel seen, and to feel like I'm a savage. You know what I mean? I'm a savage. You know what I'm saying? I got that thing on me right now. What do you mean? You know what I mean? And growing, but it's like, where does that come from originally, right? You're growing up in it. You know, I know a lot of guys who, not a whole lot, but I know guys who didn't grow up that way. Yeah. Great living situation.
For sure.
You know, or definitely wasn't poor. But just because you're in it, that thing still may seem a little bit more attractive to you. And next thing you know, that person is, you know, I mean, not that tattoos are a sign of it, but they tat it up. It's like, you know, they've kind of gone over to that side of things. And so it's an interesting question. I think it starts with whatever happens in the hood, right, in your area, and that's, you know, that trickles into the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you and I, like you said, we've had these conversations. Yeah. It's been like a chess game.
Like for real.
We're having these conversations for years,
back and forth.
And I don't think. I don't even like, I mean, I would pose the question, like, not who's to blame, but kind of think from it, like, who is accountable? Like, this is a culture, right? And the culture is like a standard, customs that people create.
Yeah.
Right? So when I look at hip hop culture and some of the violence that's been prevalent or more prevalent, some would say now, I just question and I would ask people to challenge themselves and say, hey, you can do two things at once, and that's what we talk about. Like systemically, if you look at where the music came from, the urban areas, from the ghetto, people would say that what created that system of hopelessness, that system of poverty that makes people violent. So that's a larger system that has been created in America. But I also say music has influence, music has energy, and what you say and the words you use can create an energy and this thing that comes back to you. And if you're constantly talking about violence and killing one another, that can create something that can come to life, right?
Yeah, I mean,
so
it
does. It does come to life.
It's
right?
coming to life.
It comes to life. So I think I don't even look at it a blame thing. I think like who's to be held accountable, and that. There's a lot of people can be held accountable to what's going on in our music, right? And from the artists to the record labels to the managers to what you talk about. Like, Bryce, I'd like to get your position on this because Dave brought up something really good. It's like, well, now you got people who don't come from those circumstances, but they're talking about it, they're perpetuating it as if they are coming from a violent background and they perpetuating violence. So what do you think about that? Is it, some people say, oh, it's just entertainment, but is it like if you don't come from that and that's all you talk about?
No, I don't think it's just entertainment, but I also think it's a maturity thing. Because I do know when I first started at 11, 12 years old, I was talking about stuff that I wasn't living, and it wasn't even about violence. It was just more so like money and stuff that I didn't have because that's what I aspired to have, and that's what I wanted to have. But I was talking about it as if I did have it. And I didn't really understand the concept of like, oh yeah, you gotta, if you should, not everybody, but although it's entertainment, you should be, if you're gonna be rapping about something, it should be something that you're aligned with. And like you say, energy is real, so you shouldn't be putting stuff out into the universe that could cause you harm. But I get it why people do that. I get it, like people come from real places, and they, that's their need, that's their only way to express themselves. And so if you don't have any other outlets, and we tell people to use their imagination, that doesn't always mean your imagination will be positive. Because it's a reflection of what you may be going through and experiencing. So I see it from both sides. But most times, to your point or to your question, I look at it as a sign of maybe just immaturity in your brain. Hasn't developed that much yet. So you haven't got to the point where you kind of just look at life and really see how valuable it is. A lot of us, starting off that young, we don't really have that concept of life in that way.
Yeah, but do the labels take a huge responsibility? Because if in fact you're seeing, like, I think there's a difference between telling a narrative, like telling a story of this is how I grew up, this is what I'm surrounded by,
for sure,
than not being surrounded by that and telling that story and glorifying that, and then the labels putting money towards and pushing those artists. Do you think they push those artists who are celebrating the violence, celebrating the money, celebrating, talking about women more so than consciousness? Like, have you seen that, Dave, over the years change?
Ultimately, I think the answer is yes. But I think the reason why it's yes is because, we're more attracted to drama than we are to positivity.
Human beings.
Human beings are. I mean, when you look at the reality shows, and knowing people who worked in reality, it's just like, hey, and even storytelling, right? Storytelling says that there's the number one rule is that without conflict, there's no story. So when because I'm thinking about Tribe, I'm thinking about X-Clan, I'm thinking about Public Enemy.
Here we go.
You know what I mean? Look, I'm speaking his language, and I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about, man, even when you got somebody shortly after that in Outkast who was talking all that talk you want to hear, but it wasn't murder, kill.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were as cool as you could get as rappers come,
right?
And it was, you know what I mean? So at some point in time, it's like you got 50 Cent in 2002 or 3, whenever he came out. The marketing was a shattered glass and him in a
being shot 9 times.
Him in a bulletproof vest.
That was it,
right? But then I heard Jadakiss say in in a documentary one time. He was like, well, they told me that anything over 700,000 units sold is white folk, right?
Oh.
So it was like, oh wait,
That your audience is.
That your audience, what albums, right? Anything over
right.
700,000
that you've now
is,
started to
you know.
get
Now I
a
don't know
white
the
audience.
exact
Yeah.
number, but
Yeah.
what the story that tells is like, oh, they help keep it afloat.
Right.
They market it to them. They go back to their, you know, to their, you know, well-to-do. So they go back to their suburbs where the bulk of us, who comes back home and we have to kind of exist in that world. Like, you know what I mean? I've had a gun pulled on me. Like, you know what I mean? And if I was a rapper, then I would use that in my, you know, it could put a 38, but it was too late. I was already gone. I skirt, now I'm alone. Like you know what I mean?
We make it cool.
Look, I rap every single day, by the way. I heard Paul Revere. Listen, Big Bro was 10 years older than me. He played me Paul Revere. I rapped every day since I heard.
Here's a little story,
Man, you know, but I'm just saying, like, that would have been, not to take up all the time.
No, that's a good point.
You know, it's such a conundrum. It's such a hard thing to work out in your mind. I remember I was 19, and I remember hearing Shine's first album, and I was like, yo, this is amazing. I was like, but the amount of death at 19, right? I'm thinking like the amount of death on here is just scary.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to listen to, and listen, my favorite rap album is probably It's Dark and Hell is Hot. I was an angry teenager, and I processed it in a different way.
Got it.
And it's sometimes I think maybe how you process it is based on your imagination, and based on your upbringing.
For sure.
So I didn't listen to all that X-Kill stuff thinking like, man, I'll murder something out here. Like, you know what I mean? I did it, but I also have had 50 friends who've been murdered growing up, like in small Hammond, Indiana. You know what I mean? So sometimes that just depends. And something you said, I'll say this and I'll let it go. You said something about the maturity, and I think this is, you know, when a rapper's been in the game for a certain amount of time, they make the turn to having responsible, you know, whatever responsible is, because it's are you telling a story or are you glorifying? It's a thin line, I guess.
It's a very thin line.
I always fight against the whole glorifying term, like, you know, but it's a very thin line, and you never, you know, maturity is the line.
Right. It's not an easy answer. And just from, you know, from my perspective, I mean, we're all, you know,
let's get into our specific argument about it.
Different generation. Well, before we get into that, I was going to say we're all from different generations, and I will say that. So I will pose this. I will give this historical perspective. Violence and crime existed in the urban areas when hip hop was coming forth and created, but there weren't a lot of rappers that I grew up with who were talking about it, or right? They were talking about maybe their circumstances, but they weren't quote unquote glorifying it. So for some people to say, so my argument, this goes into our argument. My argument is that just because you grow up in circumstances that are, you know, dire and poverty doesn't automatically mean that you have to glorify violence. You can tell a story, right? But it's not glorifying it. They were telling stories about their existence and the fact that it was unjust and the fact that this is why these things happen.
Right.
But they weren't glorifying it like some people do now, where they're like, yeah, I just shot somebody and I'll shoot everybody. Okay, but that already existed before hip hop. Black people been poor for a long time. Black people been, and we don't even have to go into it. Black people been at the bottom of the barrel in this country for a long time. So to say, my argument is to say, well, because these are my circumstances and this is what I'm living with, this is why I have to glorify that. I would challenge that.
So what's the difference? Not to cut you off, but that's a great segue question-wise. What is the difference between glorifying something and telling a story? In terms of rap, you talk about glorifying and telling a story. What's the difference? How do you make that distinction and make that line?
That is the $1 million question.
Yeah, I think for me, like glorifying it is that you in your music, you're talking about specifically that this is how I would kill somebody. This is why I would kill somebody. This is, you know, why I'm violent. This is why I appreciate this or I love this. Flashing money, you know, flashing guns. Songs that you have talk about how you shot some other person that looks like you, as opposed to telling a story is like Dave was saying, like Dave got held up by gunpoint. So if he was a rapper, he may write a story about this is how I felt about that situation,
right,
and how it made me feel, and how now I'm on edge. I have PTSD.
Right.
Why I carry a gun now.
Yeah.
Like you're telling a whole story on what this situation created for you,
right,
and why you do it, as opposed to now, it's almost like people are apathetic to somebody actually saying like, I'll blow this nigga's head off. Like, oh, you know, that's not anything to be celebrated from my perspective.
No, you're,
Like,
but you.
And Dave, this is why I'm saying, like, this is why there's accountability on a whole lot of fronts, because the record labels have the power to say, you know what, I'm not doing, you know, freedom of speech, but this is not what we want to glorify, because we understand the ramifications of this. And you know, our argument was always, he said, like, hey, you know, this is where situations that have been created to make somebody create this, and you can't blame them. And I don't even like using the word blame, because I think it's more like, hey, you're accountable. Can we create a culture that makes us more accountable to each other and creates a system that is more compassionate and more empathetic and understanding that we don't have to operate like the world operates?
But can you create? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
go ahead. No.
Can you create that without? We can't create that in rap without it being a real thing. And in the places where these rappers come, these rappers. We're not against rap. We're not against rappers. What we are against is those thugs. No, Bone Thugs. Right. Shout out to Tasha. But if you know, is that a realistic thing? Right. To ask for maturity from a young man who comes from the bottom, who's getting it from. Is that is it realistic?
I think it's realistic. Is it going to happen all the time? No. I mean, we're just watching the Tupac doc on Hulu by the Hughes brothers, Dear Mama, and people look at now. I mean, people who grow up when Tupac was growing up, they look at him as this mythic, you know, like God. But I mean, Tupac was 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and his beginning, as he was forming, he was conscious, and his raps were conscious, and he was still a young man.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true.
He talked about police brutality. He talked about growing up in a system where you're working, you know, 2 or 3 jobs and you still can't pay your rent. Talked about, you know, Brenda had a baby and that whole real situation, and took that real situation.
Keep your head up.
Incredible strong. So I think, you can be young and still be conscious.
You can.
And then particularly if a system tells you, if the labels were to say, you know what, we don't accept that anymore. Like you can tell a story, but we're not going to have anybody coming on our labels just talking about killing another brother or talking bad about a sister. Like we create this was, and the thing that's saying is, Dave, and what I'm saying is that, and this happens with a lot of things. This is not exclusive to music. This was our culture, and in our culture, in the beginning, what I'm saying is that the beginning, that's not what it was. That's not what it was about. Violence was still happening in our communities. Right, it went extra when the crack epidemic came in, but violence was all, you know, in our communities because of the poverty. But what we weren't saying and promoting was what's happening now.
But I think, well, go ahead, Dave. I had something about you.
Yeah, I just think that was because, you know, you didn't know. You'd be like, you can cuss on one of these. You can say what you'll do to somebody.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah, right. And I think once that happened, it was just like, oh, okay, the floodgates are open. You know, enter in, you know, I forgot my man name from Philly, who Ice-T got 6 in the morning from Schoolie D. And then Ice-T, 6 in the morning, police out my door, leads you to, you know, NWA.
But even Ice-T, he's telling a story.
Yeah.
He's saying like this was really what was happening.
Like a social comment.
He was telling the story of how it went down.
Right.
He wasn't just basing the whole song about I killed, you know, people that look like me.
Right.
And I smack women around that look like me.
That's tough. The hard part.
It's tough. I got 2 things on that too, because that's tough. I want to get back to what you said. I think is important. So so we talk about Tupac, right, and what he stood for and what he talked about, but also in that documentary it showed that when he was talking about the conscious stuff, it took him for like all the labels didn't want to, it was only Interscope that took a chance on him to allow him to really have a platform to expand to where we, see today. Right. That's one thing. But two, I sometimes struggle with the whole argument is like, okay, let's just say in a perfect world we woke up yesterday and labels had some type of standard. They said if you're talking about X, Y, and Z, you would not get a record deal. You would not get promoted. My only issue with that is, what about those kids who come in from these environments? They don't have no other outlets. If they feel like music is their way to get out, to make a decent living and be able to provide for their family, who am I to interfere with that, even if it is destructive or even if it is it's talking about a certain thing? Like, I don't know what other alternatives they would have. A lot of people, a lot of kids that's rappers that are being popular or getting money at this age in their life. Yeah. What other alternatives would they have if music wasn't their platform? Some people just don't have other resources. And that's really like the main thing that separated probably all of our lives from other people who we know is having options. When you don't have options, I don't know that world. That I haven't existed in that world, so I can't say what I would say and what I wouldn't do and what I wouldn't talking about. So that's my only conflict with that.
And that's tough, right? Because I think ultimately, if to be really militant, it's like it would be like, yo, so what? I'd rather you not rap at all than for you to come out here and talk about. But that's not realistic, right? And if you're talking about somebody honestly getting the opportunity to change the lives of them and their family around them, they'd have to, at the very least, like I'm going to sound, you see the gray. I'm going to sound real old on this one, right? So
some old is okay,
right?
That means wisdom,
right?
y'all.
It's like, that means wisdom. Listen, your goal is to get gray hair,
right? Exactly,
for sure.
Right? But as I'm trying to cover it up, you see, I cut half the beard now. So the songs where they're talking about, I'm smoking on this some pipe, where they're talking about people that they actually killed,
for sure,
right? At least have some kind of standards and practices so that you can't do that in a song.
Like to that extreme.
To that extreme. Like you can't name people that you've killed because, and the older I get, the more I understand the influence that social media has on people. And if social media has that influence on people, then please know the opportunity to sit up there with, with something in your hand and, y'all got these rented guns and y'all pointing them. There's an influence that comes with that too. So I'm yielding a little bit of my argument to your side. So what are you saying? Only 10%, because I don't, but
the whole thing.
There is influence, but I do think the real work has to come from the ground in order to get these guys to even want differently, to even want.
To go away, I have a perfect question, kind of adding to what you just said. Hip hop artists, what responsibility do hip hop artists have as you become bigger, as you get a platform? What responsibility do you have to, present a message that has effect on people? I know the responsibility I have as an artist, right? To have to, every time I put something out, regardless of whatever, my goal is to empower and uplift and do it through music. And if it's not that, then I can't be a part of it. I know that I'm not. That's not the norm for everybody else. That's not realistic. So what do you guys see as a happy medium in terms of responsibility for hip hop artists?
Yeah, you go, Dave?
Go ahead.
I don't even. I mean, here's the thing: music, people want to downplay it, and this is the society in which we've created. The system creates a lack of empathy and a lack of consciousness, and that has been what has been put forth as mainstream. And I understand that's what is quote unquote may be popular, but the reality to me, and I always tell this story, is that music has an energy, it has a frequency, it can influence and change people's thought process. Is it the responsibility of an artist to raise a person? Absolutely no. You have parents, you have, aunts, uncles, grandparents. That is their responsibility when you bring into this world. But I do know, we all know that music has a course to change how a person thinks, how a person views to make a person feel good.
Inspire.
We all can remember a song we grew up to that we may have listened to at a dark point in our time and our experience that made us feel better. We've all rode down the street and heard a song that reminded us of a situation, good or bad. So music has a frequency and an energy. And I always say, like, I grew up to, at 80s hip hop, and Run DMC was like at the top of their game. And if Run DMC was probably talking about guns and this is the gun I carry, that at my age, I would have been influenced by that. Sure. They were talking about Adidas. Yep. My Adidas, this is what I wear, my chain. And so that's what I moved forward with, and that's the energy that I appreciated and tried to emulate. Right. So for people to say, I don't have a responsibility, particularly as you grow as an artist and you become popular, I think you're not conscious, and saying you need to understand that you have the power to influence, and that influence can be good or bad. That's the reality of it. And you may not have asked for it. That is not something that a lot of artists get into it for and say, I want to influence people. They just get into it because, like you said, they may trying to get out of their situation, right? And I don't judge that at all. Like you said, if you've never had options and this is an option for you to do better for your family and get out of, quote unquote hell, then hey, you got to do that. But once you start to get people to listen to you, you got an influence over people. That's just the bottom line.
And, I think that's tough, man. I think to ask them to be mature, I guess we can only just hope, apply a little bit of pressure, right? There was this big brush up recently with, not brush up, but there was a misunderstanding between rest in peace Harry Belafonte and Jay-Z, right? Where Harry Belafonte said a thing in the media that the reporter cut off, right, and didn't give the whole thing. So Jay-Z kind of took it like, a slight, and he had the lyric, he said, Hugh Blow homie, two-door homies. You don't know all the shit I do for the homies, you know? Which he was just saying that, hey, this is what I do, because Harry Belafonte's thing was just that. It was putting pressure on all the people, all the black celebrities to do your part. Yeah. And the reporter said, hey, do you even even Beyonce and Jay-Z? He said anybody who isn't should charged with the responsibility to do your part. So I think the point that you had about, you said, I know what my responsibility is. And I think that's a great path to take, which is to put heavy emphasis on, like, you don't have to tell everybody what you do, but you have to do something. You know what I mean? Because that's what's going to, each one teach one, right? We're going to have to, OGs can apply a little pressure to, to the people under them to say, hey, you got to be doing something. Like, where is your, sometimes you could just pose a question and say, all right, where's your responsibility in here to say better things? And like we were saying, sometimes rappers don't even have the longevity to even get to that point of maturity.
Yeah, most don't.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, we got, the people from that era where I start listening. Yeah. I think that's also another valuable vantage point, right? Is to have people graduate into a place of, where you can look at it and be like, hey, I've been in it since this. Yeah. And I'm telling you, perhaps you're going the wrong way. And it's going to sound judgmental. Some people may listen, some people may not. But I remember a time years ago where 5-6 years ago, where I was somewhere, I think the Migos came on. And everybody just exploded. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. And in real time, I was like, oh, they're not making rap music for me no more.
Right. You're out
of it. I'm out of it. I was like,
it's not for you. Man. Not for you anymore.
To have been somebody who was, like I said, Bigger and Duffer was my first tape before Michael Jackson, right? Paul Revere is the first song I learned all the words to. Yeah. And to be somebody who was close to the beginning like that, and where my fandom started, and to in real time experience being priced out of, being aging out of it. It was like, oh wow, it was an interesting thing to see. So, but the value in that is to be able to share something with somebody a little younger, to be like, hey, this particular place where we are now is detrimental,
or just be able to provide a different perspective. I mean, that's the whole point of. I mean, our people come from the village mentality. Like, it takes a village, and I think we've, in some regards, moved away from that. And when did that happen, right? And who do we allow to say that is okay? Right. Like, it's not judgmental. It's just like, hey, I know if you getting ready to make a right, and I made that right, I can tell you go left. Right. Like, that's called love, right? That's love. That's
Hov did that, so hopefully you don't have to go through that.
Right. Like, it's not.
I can't take it. I can't.
Right.
I can't help it.
You got him off he got him off the top of his head.
Yeah.
But when the question would be for me, like, when did it become like a hate thing? It's not a hate. Yeah. And I know people, as you're young, sometimes you think that, people are trying to judge me, telling me what to do, and I don't know if that's just a part of being youth. But the reality is that it's a blessing, and this is how we should operate, is that if I've gone down a path and I know you're going that same path, right, and I could say to you, hey man, make this left, don't do that, then I feel like that is my responsibility and obligation. Now, if you listen or not, I don't have control over that. Yeah. But now it's become where people have tried to infiltrate and try to tell us, and we've started to talk to each other in this way, like, the OGs, they hating on us. We getting our money in the hip hop game. I'm talking about, we getting money. They just hating because we getting money. They didn't get money. Yeah. And there may be some of that, but I've seen it where it's just like, well, no, I was actually the builder and created this foundation, and I'm trying to say that I can see it because I have the wisdom that this may not be the right way for us to go. Because ultimately, we're going to be destructive to our own culture and our own people. That's all that is.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why I see like that, even that dialogue, right? Because I watch a lot of interviews, a lot of older hip hop artists where they say they do give counsel, they do give guidance to the younger artists. Some of them listen, most of them don't. But the reality of it, that all again stems from maturity.
Yeah, it's true.
If we don't, some of them people that's coming into this game don't really see themselves living that long. That's the fact. Yeah. So they like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just in this to get this money. Yeah. The next couple of years, and then whatever happens from there, I'm cool with it.
Yeah, and if you fresh out the mud, we stupid for expecting that person to have the sensitivity of
understanding
45-year-old. Or 43, I'm 43, I ain't 40. You're putting 2 more years on it just because I got this gray hair.
He's actually 45.
Right. Little thought bubble. And I don't appreciate how my brother is, like, look at all this gray I got. And then look, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know. When you cook your own food, I guess this is.
That's all it. Genetics.
But, it's such a, I don't know, because so my argument usually with him, the hardcore part of it,
the hardcore
is me saying that, hey, you can't change. Like, you're asking for magic to happen if you're asking, a young, 20-year-old to all of a sudden be sensitive to it, and it's like to judge it in that way is to, or to point the finger at them in that way is to kind of dismiss all that the country put us in, the handcuffs that they put us in. And it's like, without acknowledging that, but then we're going to look to the rapper and say, hey, you, stop talking about that stuff that's happening in your community, or stop glorifying this stuff in this way. But it's like, if that's what they come from, it's like, we got to fix that other thing first. But there is a time where we start to look at that and say, kind of say, hey, that person that you're talking about, C4 to your door, no beef, no more. Right? Who is he talking to? Like, who is Big talking to? He's not talking to a white person. Like, you know what I mean? He's telling stories, but it's like he's not talking to the people who are enemies to black people. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? He's talking to another black person most of the time. And that's the part that it has been hard for me to contend with. At time when you listen to the lyrics and it's just like, wow, the wordplay is incredible. But Who is he talking?
Who he talking to? That's it.
Yeah.
I'm happy you said that because that's you talked about it. Pops talked about it earlier. Is energy, right?
Yeah.
I always think about it, and it's like you listen to these songs that glorify or whatever, say certain things, and the energy in them. If I took it that way, if I wasn't, mature enough and involved enough, I take it and then they're talking to me. That's how it is. They're talking to you when you come from certain environments, and because of the conditions America put us in, you grow up frustrated with this rage, with this anger, and you can't take it out on the people that you want to take it out on.
No.
So you take it so closest to
so
you.
you
take it right on to the own people.
Yeah.
That's how I
God.
see that, and that's why we get a lot of the situations we get in the hip hop industry because the person hears the song you rapping about I'll kill a nigga next time I see him. And then when you come to a show and you do a show in our city, we want to see if you about that.
We want to see if you're about that.
And that's the whole thing I was talking about with energy.
That's the part of the
energy.
that I get. So it's
Dave and I, my argument wasn't that pointing the finger and telling somebody, because I don't think anybody, regardless of what it is, changes when people are pointing a finger. My thing is that we could do both. We have to do both. Like we have to obviously change the system in which America has created, where we have this underclass, this permanent underclass of people, which is usually people of color that look like you and me. And why is that? And question that and push against that. And that's going to take time.
Yeah.
Like we're still fighting, the residuals. We're still fighting to change police brutality.
Yeah.
That's been going on forever. But also, how do we understand and hold our own culture and our own people accountable and maybe change the direction in which they're going by saying, hey, that may not be the route that you want to take. I know you don't understand it, but and not saying, hey, don't do that, because to your point, to be able to do that is a privilege, right? To be able to tell you if your lights are cut off for a whole week and you don't know where you're getting ready to get the next meal, and you got family members and somebody says, I'll give you a rap contract for $100,000.
Yeah.
We don't care who you talk about killing. Right.
But,
then okay. I'm probably going to take that route out, right?
I will say this, though. And we're just coming to a place as a society where, mature or not, that all that tough talk is going to have to be directed somewhere else pretty soon.
Right.
We can't have, now I'm not calling for anything, but what I'm saying is the world that exists where you can talk all that to another black person and not have any of that smoke for the people who harm us, that day is shrinking. Like the day is getting short on that. There's going to have to be a time where you have to put that same kind of energy towards protecting us. I'm not saying that you don't have enemies where you grew up. I understand gang culture. I understand it. But there's going to come a time where the day is coming where you're going to have to borrow some of that energy you have for another black person to someone else, to protecting, that person that looks
and that's a good word. I'm glad you said that, protecting.
That's a fact.
And that's my whole energy in the way in which I think, and I hope it never comes off judgmental. It's more like protecting. So when we talk about hip hop culture, I'm protective of hip hop culture because I saw it come from nothing and what it's created now. People losing their lives, people losing their kids and other kids, and generations of people that are losing their lives. And it's not just the blame on the music, it's obviously the conditions, but the energy that is created there and all the hurt and pain that goes, to grandmothers and mothers and girlfriends, and all these things have to suffer through PTSD. So when I look at it, and someone say this may be simplistic, but then I also say, well, damn, we're the only music where people are worrying about this. Rock and roll, they don't worry about this. Jazz, they don't worry about this. Country music, they don't worry about it. So why we got to question that. And why do we think that is okay? We may not think it's okay, but why have we become apathetic to it?
Yeah.
Why have we become unconscious to it?
And that's
we just say, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's unacceptable. Things can change. And it may not change in my lifetime, but if you don't talk about it, if you don't push against it, if you don't challenge it, then it'll never change. So That's all I'm saying. Like, hey, yes, all of us are individuals, and we can choose and do and say whatever we want to. But one of the things that my father used to say, Bryce's grandfather, is that I respect and appreciate freedom of speech, but freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from the outcomes of what you say in your speech, or what you do, the energy that you create. So that's all I think about as well.
And so, this has been a great dialogue. We talked about a lot of this great stuff. And
we can talk for
hours.
This
is one of those topics that we talk about, but I think in society and as the industry as a whole, I think if we try to have these conversations, and it has to be in a constructive way, right? We have to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't come to some type of conclusion or some type of move or push forward. So it's like, I'll pose the question to you guys in like closing. Mm-hmm. It's like, what can we do, meaning hip hop, meaning our community, meaning all of us that are involved in this thing that we all love, what can we do to create a more socially responsible industry? Because nobody else, like we talked about, the labels, one, that's for sure, they're never going to, they're not pushing for that because there's so much money in the negativity and the destruction of our own people. So how do we, as people in our community, help or work towards creating solutions to a more socially responsible hip hop?
Yeah. So since, my forever stance on this is going to be, from the ground floor up. You used to be involved in mentoring. You have the block. It's called Black or the Block? The Black Neighborhood. It has to be that because it's, it's a weird thing. It's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Right, one bite at a time.
So I think the less young men that would become influenced by something like that, you know what I mean? So much so that they start to emulate it, the better. Yeah, it's just going to have to, you got to pick them off one by one. And eventually, that's something that can never stop, right? And eventually, if, mentoring, taking time, showing yourself as a positive example of somebody who made it out without, a wicked jump shot or a sling crack, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was my last one. My last round. You know what I mean? But by showing examples that, hey, this person made it out without that, sometimes you can't be what you don't see. So if you start to see more, then lights pop off in your head like, oh, never discount, what part inspiration going to have in the life of a child. So the more that child sees, boy or girl, the more they can kind of aspire to the wider range of things they can aspire to be. And I think that eventually, because we can't fight corporate, like you know what I mean? I think that's the only way to really combat that situation.
What about you, Bob?
I definitely appreciate Dave reminding folks about mentorship because, to your point, mentorship is powerful.
Yeah.
Being able to spend time with young people, whatever capacity that is. If you can do a full mentorship, I would definitely suggest that. I've done that in my lifetime and seen the impact that it has. I also would say support the artists that are creating, a different message. There are a lot of them out there.
Absolutely.
Bryce is one of them.
I was going to say.
Bryce Savoy, but one of the things about, being around Bryce is that I've been able to see that there's other artists that are powerful, that are talented, that are, sending different messages. They just don't get the mainstream support that they need. So I would say if you hear someone like that, celebrate that, let other people know. I think that's important. And the last thing I would challenge Dave on is that I think we can change corporate. I think we have more power than we think we do. It's just that we're going to have to do it collectively. And so there are people that, are sitting in seats. And I think the consumer has a lot more power than they used to because of streaming and because of, the democratization of music. So the consumer can push against certain things. Radio, you can push against certain things, but that's a long game. I know that. Most systems change. This thing about it is most systems change is a long game.
It's a long game.
It's a marathon. So in the middle of that, one of the important things, like Dave said, is that we do our groundwork as well. That we spend time with young people.
Yeah.
We talk about, our experiences. We listen to what their experiences are without judging them. I think that's important as well. So those are things that I would add.
Yeah.
And I would say, lastly, man, I've been in this thing for 20 years, and I went through all the different, changes you can go through as an artist. But the one thing that I've learned is that it's a long game. If you want to have longevity in this space, it's finding different ways to be true to yourself, whatever that looks like. Man, and I feel like the more that you step into that and become a leader in your own right, I think everything else will fall into place. So that would be just my advice, would just be the way that I see us moving forward as a culture, is just really finding more people like myself and a lot of other artists who are really just being true to themselves and not worrying about the mainstream or the different accolades that society places on us and make us feel like we have to have in order to be successful.
Yeah, great.
That's what I was.
He's a prime example
well
of what
said.
he just said. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So,
absolutely.
All right.
Once again, this is Bryce and Bryce, the Fan and the Artist, episode 4. Thank you, David, Ashley, my brother.
Yes, Dave.
This has been a great conversation. Let's keep the dialogue going.
Bye.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.